Woodhaven Heights, safe, secure, a picturesque suburban enclave where every house looks like it was plucked from a magazine cover. The streets are lined with perfectly trimmed hedges, and the air is filled with the scent of blooming flowers. Perfect. Karen Miller fit right in. She was the epitome of suburban bliss, always with a smile on her face and a friendly wave for her neighbors. Her life was a carefully curated Instagram post-manicured lawn, gleaming SUV, 2 beautiful children. Every detail meticulously planned and executed to perfection. The lawn was always green, the flowers always in bloom, and the children always well behaved. Everything pristine, everything in its place. The house was a model of organization, with not a single item out of place. The kitchen counters gleamed, the floors sparkled, and the furniture was arranged just so. Richard, her husband, was successful. Handsome even. He was the kind of man who turned heads at the office and made other men envious. His career was on an upward trajectory and he provided well for his family. They were living the dream, or so it seemed. To the outside world, they were the perfect family, living the perfect life. But appearances can be deceiving. Karen woke up every morning with a nagging sense of unease. It was a feeling she couldn't quite shake, a sense that something was not quite right. She would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what it was that was bothering her. Like a hairline crack in a crystal vase, it threatened her picture-perfect life. The crack was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there, and it was growing. It was a reminder that even the most perfect things can be fragile. She pushed it down, burying it under the routine of school runs and grocery shopping. She kept herself busy, hoping that the busyness would drown out the unease. She drove the kids to school, picked up groceries, and ran errands, all with a smile on her face. She volunteered at the local charity. It was another way to keep herself occupied, another way to distract herself from the nagging feeling that something was wrong. She threw herself into her volunteer work, organizing events and helping those in need. She baked award-winning apple pies. Baking was her passion, and her pies were the talk of the town. She took pride in her baking, and it was one of the few things that brought her genuine joy. She was the perfect wife, the perfect mother. She did everything she could to make her family happy, to create a home that was warm and welcoming. She cooked delicious meals, played with the kids in the backyard, and made sure that everyone had what they needed. But perfection was a facade. Beneath the surface, there were cracks. She would look at herself in the mirror and see the stress etched on her face. She would see the worry in her eyes, the lines that were starting to form around her mouth. And facades have a way of crumbling. No matter how hard she tried to maintain the illusion, the cracks were starting to show. The perfect life she had worked so hard to create was beginning to fall apart, and she didn't know how to stop it. The news flashed across the screen, stark and unavoidable. Hitman for hire operation busted. The words seemed to leap out, demanding attention, impossible to ignore. It was the kind of headline that made the world stop for a moment, the kind that sent ripples through the fabric of everyday life. Karen froze, coffee mug slipping from her grasp. The ceramic cup tumbled in slow motion, a symbol of her sudden, jarring reality. Her mind raced, trying to process the implications of what she had just seen. The mug shattered, echoing the fear splintering through her. Each fragment on the floor mirrored the pieces of her carefully constructed life, now scattered and broken. The sound of the shattering mug was a stark contrast to the silence that enveloped her kitchen. The news anchor droned on, his voice a million miles away. Words like arrest, operation, and undercover floated through the air, but they felt distant, almost surreal. It was as if she was watching a movie, one where the plot had taken a dark, unexpected turn. Faces, blurred by the television's static, stared out at her. They were the faces of those involved, those who had been caught in the sting. Each face was a reminder of the danger that had been lurking just beneath the surface of her seemingly normal life. One face stood out. Victor. His image was clear, unmistakable. The man she had trusted to handle her problem, now exposed for the world to see. The sight of his face sent a chill down her spine. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Each beat was a reminder of the gravity of the situation, a physical manifestation of her growing panic. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, making her hands tremble. This wasn't supposed to happen. Victor was efficient, discreet. He had assured her that everything would be taken care of, that there would be no loose ends. But now everything was unraveling, and she was caught in the middle of it. He was supposed to make the problem disappear, not become a bigger one. The irony of the situation was almost too much to bear. She had hired him to eliminate a threat, and now he had become the biggest threat of all. A wave of nausea washed over her. The room seemed to spin, and she had to grip the edge of the counter to steady herself. The reality of her situation was sinking in, and it was almost too much to handle. Her carefully constructed world started to tilt on its axis. Everything she had worked so hard to build was now in jeopardy. The life she had known, the security she had taken for granted was slipping away, and she was powerless to stop it. 5 years ago, the cracks had started to appear. Richard became distant. His late nights at the office became more frequent. Then came the whispers, the knowing glances from other women at the club. Karen tried to ignore it. She clung to the illusion of their perfect life. One night she found it. His phone, open, messages filled with love and longing, not for her. Despair threatened to drown her. That's when Victor's card found its way into her hand. A solution. Quick, clean, permanent. The doorbell rang, a shrill, jarring sound that sliced through the silence. Detective Cross stood on her doorstep, his face etched with a weariness that spoke of too much crime, too little sleep. He held up his badge. "Karen Miller?" he asked, his voice devoid of inflection. He wanted to ask her some questions. "Just routine," he said, his eyes scanning her face, searching for something. Karen's carefully constructed composure threatened to shatter. She invited him in, her smile tight, brittle. The scent of her fear, acrid and sharp, filled the room. The diner was a greasy spoon on the edge of town. Its neon signs flickered, casting an eerie glow on the cracked pavement. The place had seen better days, but it was perfect for clandestine meetings, the kind where secrets were exchanged over greasy burgers and cold coffee. Victor sat across from her, his eyes cold and calculating. He was a man who thrived in the shadows, where his true nature could remain hidden. His presence was like a dark cloud, heavy and foreboding, making the air around them thick with tension. His presence exuded an air of danger that both terrified and thrilled her. Karen couldn't help but feel a shiver run down her spine every time their eyes met. It was as if he could see right through her, peeling back the layers of her soul to expose her deepest fears and desires. "You need to fix this," she hissed, her voice a low, urgent whisper. Her hands trembled slightly as she leaned in closer, trying to keep her composure. The stakes were too high for her to falter now. She needed him to understand the gravity of the situation. Victor leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was a smile that held no warmth, only a cold, calculated amusement. He enjoyed watching her squirm, knowing that he held all the power in this twisted game they were playing. "Everything comes at a price, Karen." His voice was smooth, almost soothing, but the words carried a weight that made her heart sink. She knew he was right. Nothing in this world was free, especially not the kind of help she needed. Fear coiled in her stomach. It was a familiar feeling, one that had been her constant companion ever since she had gotten involved with Victor. She had thought she could handle it, that she could outsmart him, but now she wasn't so sure. She had paid him once. The memory of that transaction was still fresh in her mind. The way his eyes had gleamed with satisfaction as he pocketed the money. She had hoped it would be enough, that it would buy her some peace, but it had only drawn her deeper into his web. Was she willing to pay again? The question echoed in her mind, each repetition making her feel more trapped. She knew the cost would be higher this time, and she wasn't sure if she could afford it, either financially or emotionally. Her life, her freedom, hung in the balance. Every decision she made from this point on would determine her fate. She felt the walls closing in around her, the weight of her choices pressing down on her like a physical force. The weight of her choices pressed down on her. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had to be strong, had to find a way out of this mess. But as she looked into Victor's cold eyes, she couldn't help but wonder if she was already too far gone. The news played on a loop in her mind. Victor arrested, the Hitman operation exposed, and she, his client, dangling precariously in the wind. The phone rang. Detective Cross. His voice was devoid of warmth. "We need to talk, Mrs. Miller." Karen's world, so meticulously crafted, crumbled around her. Victor hadn't protected her. He had thrown her to the wolves. Her secret, the one she had so desperately tried to bury, was out, and she was going down with it. The courtroom was a cold, sterile place. The judge's gavel pounded a steady rhythm of doom. Karen sat in the sterile box, her face pale, her eyes dull with defeat. The evidence was overwhelming. Her calls to Victor, the money transfers, her carefully constructed life, her lies lay in ruins around her. Richard sat on the other side of the aisle, his face a mask of betrayal and disgust. Their children, their faces stained with tears and confusion, were absent. They were better off without her. She had become a monster, consumed by her own demons. Guilty. The word echoed in the silent courtroom. Karen closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. The price of her choices, years of freedom, her family, her life, gone, all gone. She had traded it all for a fleeting sense of control, for revenge. The slam of the prison gate echoed the finality of her situation. She was trapped, not by bars, but by her own choices. The life she had once known, the life she had so desperately tried to hold on to, was nothing more than a distant memory. The bars of her cell were a constant reminder of her fall from grace. The woman in the mirror, her eyes haunted, her face etched with regret, was a stranger. Karen was gone, consumed by the monster she had created. Woodhaven Heights, with its manicured lawns and perfect families, seemed a world away. She was living a nightmare of her own making, trapped in a cage of her own design. A chilling reminder that even in the suburbs, darkness lurks, and sometimes it wears a familiar face.